to the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School class, and we're continuing our journey through Dr. William Johnson's book about the Adventist Church. Can you just hold that up? Everybody has that, or you should have it, but anyway. So this is kind of a, what should I say? A forward-looking book. And so we appreciate Dr. Johnson here today. Oh, there you are. You're sitting on the end, so you have to leave her up. Oh, okay. I mean, you don't have to run it. All right. We appreciate your book. Let's see. I just wanted to mention that next week, Gerald Whitehouse, you're going to be our speaker, aren't you? And that topic is mission. More than numbers. Well, great. We're looking forward to that one. And then in 2 weeks, well, you get me. So don't want to miss that one. You know, we'll be speaking on inspiration. Okay, our speaker today is Dr. Ben Clausen. Dr. Clausen works at the Geoscience Research Institute, and if you don't know where it is, at that very nice building. What is this, Campus Street down there? I mentioned that is a general conference institution. It's not part of the university, so they're all there by themselves, and so they're kind of on the pointy head of the spear when it comes to research and different issues like that. Today, as I said, Dr. Clausen, who works in the Geoscience Research Center, is here with us, and I think you've been there since 1990. That's correct. And he's here with his wife, is it Debbie? You're my neighbor, you know. I don't know if you know. We live just down the hill from you, a little bit by Mesa Grande, so we'll be coming up for dinner sometimes. But we're glad that you're here today. I just want to mention a few things about Dr. Clausen. Dr. Clausen has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Union College in physics and math, and has a PhD in nuclear physics from the University of Colorado, which is at Boulder, Colorado. I have to make sure I get that right, because I know people from Colorado make a distinction between University of Colorado and Colorado State. You don't want to confuse them. So it's kind of like in Michigan State. So anyway, his thesis is one that you'll probably want to get. It's called Pion Scattering to 8 Stretch States. By the way, I think you can get all these theses from the University of Michigan, can't you? So if we'll do that. But anyway, I was impressed with Dr. Clausen. Look at all the papers that he has. I'm trying to make sure I do justice. He has 20 published papers, and I have a list of 4 pages of his materials. So if you want to look at that. One of Dr. Johnson's concerns was that as a result of the 2015 session, that there would be a kind of a straitjacket put on scientists within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and then especially how they would work with other scientists. Dr. Clausen works with the University of Arizona as well as USC. So he's well recognized outside of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as well. And so I think you don't want to hear me anymore, so Dr. Clausen, if you'll come down, and then at about 10 after or whenever you finish, we'll have question and answer. Hello? Is it working? Okay. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to try to make this presentation as ho-hum as possible. First of all, I would like to give a personal thank you to Dr. Johnsson, who I've known over the years.
often from a distance, but at times close up, and I have very much appreciated the inspiration that he's given me. I enjoyed this chapter in the book. I assume all of you, or many of you, have read the chapter already. This is kind of an outline of where I am thinking of going. And as usual, I probably have way too much to say here, so I'll probably not cover every single one of my slides. See, I'm supposed to finish about 10 minutes past 11 or something like that, and then after that there'll be question and answers. Okay. I have 2 slides where I've kind of outlined the topics in the chapter that I consider are quite important, and I've put them in my own particular order. I often give talks, and I often have 4 points that I'm looking at. So I have 2 slides where I'll outline that. Next, I have 2 slides to kind of give you an idea of where I'm coming from on these issues. One slide talks specifically about experiences I've had just this year, to kind of give you an idea of the kind of things I'm working on. Then I have a second slide that gives you a list of the kind of talks that I give that are related to what's in this chapter. Then I have quite a few slides giving some positive responses to this chapter. And they will be listed under those 4 points. And I'm sure I'm not going to get through all of these, but we'll kind of pick and choose which ones are going to maybe be of most interest. Then, if I can get a video clip to work, I'll show you a video clip. I'm not sure whether that's going to work or not. I haven't checked it out, and we may just skip that. Then I have lots and lots of examples of personal stories where I have had many, many positive interactions with people outside the Seventh-day Adventist community. And I'd like to share some of those stories with you. I'm putting those at the end. I'd prefer that was not videotape. They're personal stories, and it would probably be better not to have those put on the web. Okay, this is the way I've outlined the chapter. I appreciated the chapter very much. I think they're very important issues. As I make these kind of talks, I say my number 1 priority is the Bible, and I especially appreciated this chapter's emphasis on worship, doxology, joy, adoration, and the emphasis on creativity. And it made me think I need to do that more myself in my presentations, is emphasizing that part. Here, I like the title of the chapter, Jubilation or Confrontation. Too often it seems to be the confrontation and not so much of the jubilation. Second, the chapter emphasized the part about all in 6 days. This is what the pioneers believed, not some kind of 2-stage creation. And we'll talk a little bit about that. These little red stars here are the ones that I have a separate slide for, so we'll come back and talk about these each individually if we have the time. The emphasis on the Sabbath as the memorial of creation, and Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Both of those I appreciated very much. So, under the first section, the Bible. Second section, under nature. What do we learn about God from nature? Nature study is important to Seventh-day Adventists. I appreciated that part. We're not obscurantists. Leading researchers within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and an encouragement to the scientists that are members of the church. Also noting we don't really understand how to fit radiometric dating, plate tectonics, the geologic column, and so forth into this short time frame. So what do you do with that? Also the emphasis on the world being both good and bad. We see the violence, predation, death, and evil, and so forth. And also the emphasis on not naturalism, recognizing there's something more than just pure naturalism. Third, the harmony between the two. How do you deal with that? The emphasis in the chapter was on this is a conundrum, with the example of Galileo and the problems that he had. No one has all the answers. However, the emphasis, Seventh-day Adventists can be part of the answer, And the Geoscience Research Institute is tasked with doing that. And the emphasis on the conferences from 2002 to 2004, 3 years of conferences that looked at this. Then some discussion about the fundamental beliefs, the change a couple years ago in the fundamental beliefs. The idea was we want to make sure that we don't compromise, but also the concern, let's not go beyond what the Bible says. So, some of the changes, a recent creation, literal, same unit of time, historical, and something about a global flood. However, it doesn't specifically say 6,000 years, nor does it talk about 24-hour days. And this was emphasized to us several weeks ago. And then the story about James Ussher, and I put in here John Lightfoot as well, and I have a slide about that as well. Most don't care about the changes. I would agree with the chapter that a lot of members, they don't pay too much attention to it. Some are glad for the changes, others are troubled. And finally, the emphasis that both the Bible and nature speak about God. And finally, as I give these presentations, I emphasize number 4, but maybe it should be number 1. How do we relate this to people as we interact with them? First of all, to point to Jesus, and accepting scientists within the church and also outside. And this was one thing that the chapter didn't really emphasize, but I see as extremely important. What do we have to say to people outside the church, scientists outside the church, that will draw them in? Not suspicion, debate, argument, polarization. Okay, so that's my 4-point outline of the chapter that I have put in my own framework of thinking about it. Okay, so where am I coming from as I am talking about this? Okay, this is some of the stuff I've done in the past 4 months, 5 months since March. A little bit of science, and a little bit of lecturing. I spent all of the month of March in Chile and Peru doing research with several students as well as several professors, one from the University of Southern California. I worked with, quote, the father of Chilean geology briefly, as well as some other geologists in Chile. I also worked with a geologist who's a staff geologist at one of the Inca ruins just north of Cuzco. If some of you have been to Cuzco, maybe you've been to Sacsayhuaman, that's just outside of Cuzco. We spent a brief amount of time there at the Inca ruins and collected some samples near there. And just yesterday, we submitted an abstract to Geological Society of America on some of our work there in Chile that I'm doing with a guy from who was from Caltech. In May, we went to Bali and gave lectures for educators in the Southern Asia, let's see if I get the Southern Asia Pacific Division, I think is what it's called. In June, I spent a very brief time at the south rim of the Grand Canyon, giving a little bit of a lecture to a group from France that was interested in the geology there. At the end of June and into July, let's see, there was a 10-day field conference for General Conference administrators in the Alps. We started in Milan. We looked at the Italian Alps and the French Alps and the Swiss Alps and so forth, looking at the geology part of the time as well as lectures. Earlier this month, a couple weeks ago, I spent a day at the University of Arizona at their lasercron lab, where I got several hundred, actually about 600 uranium lead zircon ages from samples we had collected in Peru in March. And we are going to be submitting an abstract on that to Geological Society of America probably tomorrow or the next day. We already have the abstract, my student's working on it, and it should be, the August one is the deadline for it. Also, this last month, just in the last couple weeks, I have had a publication in Geological Society of America Field Guide. A year ago, we led a 3-day field trip looking at the granites here in Southern California. I was in charge of 1 day, So about 40 pages of the field guide is mainly mine, talking about the granites from Corona to Mount San Jacinto. And finally, next week, I have a student who is defending a dissertation on cooling of batholiths. If you have a large granitic body like in Yosemite, how long does that granitic rock take to cool down? Okay, so I have lots of different talks that I give on various topics: cosmology, physics, geology, plate tectonics, time, my own research, a little bit about Galileo, power of God in nature, how does one deal with the problem of evil, the faith journey of a scientist, how the Sabbath is a symbol of my understanding of how I relate science and religion, how do we go about sharing our worldview, and occasionally I've given a talk on my walk with Jesus. Okay, so now I have quite a few slides looking at the different points that are in this chapter. And I really appreciated the emphasis on what the Bible has to say about God as the Creator. And I consider it so important, I'm going to read some of these to begin with. First of all, Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. And Revelation 4, I especially appreciate. You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. 4 weeks ago today, we were in the French Alps, and they asked me to be in charge of the Sabbath morning program for General Conference administrators. And I arranged for Elder Wilson to give the sermon that morning. And I told him how much I appreciated it, and I asked him if I could have a copy of it. And just a few days ago, I think maybe this Wednesday, he sent me an outline of the talk that he gave. And this is just a very shortened version of it, but I'll emphasize some of the things that he gave in that talk. He emphasized Revelation 14:7, worship God who made heaven and earth. He also emphasized Revelation 4:11. He noted we don't have all the answers. Patriarchs and Prophets says, science opens new wonders to our view. She soars high and explores new depths. The book of nature and the written word shed light upon each other. Then he said, God created the Sabbath to help his creation. Look to him. Another place in Patriarchs and Prophets, it says, man needed to lay aside his own interests and pursuits for one day of the seventh, that he might more fully contemplate the works of God and meditate upon his power and goodness. And a few days later, we went to Grindelwald. He emphasized the mountains there speak of God's power, and then he finished by talking about David and Goliath and fighting the giants of our day. I also sent him a report on the GSA field guide. And yesterday, or the day before, maybe it was Thursday, he sent me a short note of appreciation for the field guide that I worked on and the report that I gave about that. So, in the chapter, it talks about the six-day creation. This was a conference in St. George in 2014. The theme song that we sang several times each day, it started out, God took 6 days and created earth and moon, the stars and sun. And that seems to be the most consistent reading, to me, of how one looks at what the Bible has to say. And for me, the Sabbath is a symbol of many different things. I have a whole talk on this, so this is just kind of the summary slide for that talk. We're to worship the Creator, Revelation 14, the three angels' messages, not the creation or the creature or the beast. It's a symbol that God is the Lord of time. It's a symbol that God is a personal God. It's a symbol that God is wiser than we are. So we worship on the seventh day, even if we don't understand exactly how or what God created during the 7 days. And it's a symbol that we need rest from our worry, from trying to explain the creation and flood. And I usually prefer not giving talks about this on Sabbath. I prefer to rest from having to worry about this. But it seems like often I have to give talks in it. So, okay, response number 2 about nature. How does one deal with nature? I have a whole talk that I give about God's power in nature, and I was going to show you about 50 slides about this that I do, but I don't think I'm going to have time. If any of you have watched the movie Contact, it's based on Carl Sagan's book, Contact. It's an interesting movie. Right at the beginning, it starts here on Earth, goes out to the moon, the edge of the solar system, the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, out to the edge of the universe. It's kind of neat. I have kind of done that in a set of 50 slides where I start, for you, I would start here on a flower here on the campus and go out in powers of 10, larger and larger, out to the edge of the universe. And note that this is what God created and this is what God controls. Then, back to the flower again, smaller and smaller, down to the atom, the nucleus, the protons, the quarks, and God is in total control of all of that as well. He's in control of that power that makes the atomic bomb, E equals mc squared, and so forth. I'm not going to have time to go through it, but anyway, God is in control of all of that. So as we look at nature, we also see it pointing to God. Nature shows the need for something more. At the conference 3 years ago in St. George, there was an emphasis that the church wants good science to be done. So in the Adventist Review, there was a note that Mike Ryan gave the sermon, the second Sabbath, Adventist schools called to become global scientific leaders. Mike Ryan, vice president, tells educators that the secret is to remain faithful like Moses and Daniel. And then in that same report on the second page, it specifically emphasizes Loma Linda University as an example of that. Personally, I must say that the church has been incredibly supportive of my research. They have put an amazing amount of money into the research that I and my students are doing. And they have asked for me to submit more proposals in October, so I'll be submitting some more as well. However, hard rock geology is pretty difficult to fit into a short time frame. Hard rock geology is granites, volcanoes, a lot of plate tectonics fits into that. I've been studying this for 15 years now. I don't know how you fit it into a short time frame. Plate tectonic movement, mountain uplift, folding and faulting. How do you transport the magma, cool it down, and so forth, and especially the radiometric ages. So I have been working, actually I've been to University of Arizona 3 times now. They have been very good to work with. We've gotten lots of uranium, lead, zircon ages there. I don't know how to fit that into a short time frame. So, as I have worked on my research, what guidelines do I use? And I have appreciated Randy Yonker's outline of some of the guidelines that he used in the, quotes, Andrew's way of doing archaeology. So I put some of those in there, and then I've added some myself. Don't expect science to prove the Bible. Signs were not Jesus' primary approach. Be patient. Don't expect quick, easy answers. Be slow to judge scientists as sinister. Claim from the data only what it can support. Don't minimize problems or stretch interpretations to explain things away. Work within mainstream scholarship. Be a careful, responsible research colleague. Test ideas and models to see if they fit the data from nature. Address the big picture more than scattered features, and work toward a constructive model more than attacking existing models. So that is the kind of thing we're trying to do in our research. Just this last March, as we were working in Peru, you have almost the entire geologic column as you go from the Pacific Ocean around Ica, where we're working, about 300 kilometers south of Lima, up through Cuzco, Machu Picchu area, and then into the Amazon. And we have sampled rocks from that entire transect across there, and we are trying to look at the big picture of cycles of magnetism and plate tectonics to understand what are the different possibilities for interpreting that data. We see the evil in nature. We see the evil in humans. How does one understand that? I'm no theologian or philosopher, but I do give a talk on that as well. And I don't think that there are ways to answer that issue, but I think there are many clues to help one understand it better as one looks at the origins issues. And this is just a summary of a complete talk. Some clues about evil. First of all, we have a good creation. Evil is not God's fault. Second, the fall. Evil comes as the result of the freedom to love. Third, the flood is an example of how God is fair. God is just, and evil will be judged with justice. Fourth, the incarnation. It's not just us down here feeling the evil. God feels it even more than we do. It's felt by the Creator as well as the creation. It's limited in time. Evil is only for a moment. And if God made a good creation to begin with, He can make a good new creation. So, forward looking. As I look at nature, I see that it points me to the need for something more. And I have a list of quite a few different areas there. And I have a story about evidence and reason, but the need for something more. People get a kick out of this story, but I think if you're interested, I'll save it for the end and not emphasize it right now, because it looks like I'm running short on time. So, a place for evidence and reason, but the suggestion that there's a need for something more as well. Okay, third. First was the Bible. Second was, what does nature have to say? Third is, how does one relate the two? And I'm emphasizing this third, not first or second, but third, because if you put it first or second, there is a temptation to, as you find the data from the two sources, either give up on the Bible or start saying foolish things about the scientific data that can't be supported. And unfortunately, I've seen this too often, that people jump to try to make that harmony a little bit too quickly and end up saying foolish things about both sides. So, I have had to learn to live with paradoxes. Now, I'm used to doing that in physics, where light is treated both as a wave and as a particle. And I guess theologians have to deal with the paradoxes of God's omniscience and human free will, Jesus as being both divine and human. The chapter talked about Galileo. I think there was a page or two in the chapter about Galileo. I think this is an important example of the relation between science and religion. And I would suggest that the big problem there, both for the church as well as for Galileo, would suggest, was trying to tie the theology and the science a little bit too closely together. I think that both speak of God, but if you jump to doing that too quickly, you can end up having a problem with both. And then I put some of the abbreviated goals for the conference we had earlier this month as well. Okay, the issue of time is right within our name as Seventh-day Adventists. The 7-day creation points to history, a short past since the entrance of evil. Adventists, the second Advent, points to the future, prophecy, a short future, and a soon restoration to good. So an emphasis on the short time frame. Revelation 6:10, the saints under the altar say, "How long, O Lord?" And for me, that's the reason I prefer the short time frame. I have some stories about what surgery was like before there was anesthesia. And I have one story about a physician. He was considered the best in England because he was the quickest. He could amputate a leg in less than 2 minutes. So, if you got to have something bad happen, you want it in as short a time frame as possible. Okay, now, a little bit of humor. This is on a website, and you may want to read the entire article. But Seventh-day Adventists seem to like the word literal. And so here is a little bit of humor on that. The title of the article was literally centuries of non-literal literally. And so he gives some examples. This is from The Great Gatsby. He literally glowed. Okay? Another one by Charles Dickens. Lift him out, said Squeers, after he had literally feasted his eyes in silence upon the culprit. Another one from Jane Eyre. Literally, I was the apple of his eye. Another one from Punch magazine. The wretch did not make a single remark during dinner, whereas I literally blazed with wit. And so forth. So there's some other examples there. So one needs to think a little bit about this word literal. What does it mean? Is it mainly just an emphasizer to emphasize, well, this is really very important or something like that? So if you're interested, I can give you the URL for that if you want to look at the entire piece. It's quite a discussion about the use of the term literal or literal. Okay, another one, this isn't real important, but it's of interest. In the chapter, it talked about October 22, 4004 BC at 6 p.m. Often people don't get this exactly right, and it's not quoted correctly. So I have two references here. One is from Stephen Jay Gould, who many of you may know his name. He was a Harvard biologist who popularized biology topics. Very fascinating writer. I've enjoyed reading some of his material. He wrote for the magazine Natural History. But he wrote one article about James Ussher, titled Fall in the House of Usher, with reference to Edgar Allan Poe, if you know some of Edgar Allan Poe's writings. In this chapter, or in this article, Stephen Gould says, I shall be defending Usher's chronology as an honorable effort for its time, in arguing that our usual ridicule only records a lamentable small-mindedness based on mistaken use of present criteria to judge a distant and different past. So Gould actually felt like Usher had done a good scholarly job when he came up with those numbers. Now, it's not Usher himself who came up with the specific time. He just talked about the creation started the evening before October 23. So technically, the 6 p.m. is kind of an addendum. The actual time was suggested by John Lightfoot, and he wasn't referring to the time of the beginning of creation, but the time for the creation of man. And so you can look up this one, it's a separate one. And this was published in the Journal of Geological Education, and they have about 10 pages where they say most science texts that ridicule this date don't even get the data right. They conflate two different authors and they make a mess of it, and he's trying to solve the problem. So what Usher said was, it fell upon the entrance of the night preceding the 23rd of October in the year of the Julian calendar 710. So it doesn't actually say 6 p.m., it just says at the entrance of the night, which I suppose would be approximately 6 p.m. But then John Lightfoot says, man created by the Trinity about the 3rd hour of the day, or 9 o'clock in the morning. So that's where he got some kind of specific time for when Adam was created. Okay, then, a powerful God. We don't know how God accomplished what happened in Genesis 1 to 11. This is specifically emphasized in spiritual gifts as well as patriarchs and prophets. I don't know how to solve the conflict between the science data that I work with and what the Bible says. But I'm willing to accept what it says in Desire of Ages. God has 1,000 ways to do things of which we know nothing. And I think too often our picture of God is too small. Finally, and my biggest emphasis is, how do we relate this to people? How do we find a way to emphasize that Adventism and Christianity have something meaningful to say to the secular mind? Mrs. White often talks about this, but I like this quotation from Madeline L'Engle. She says, we draw people to Christ not by loudly discrediting what they believe, but telling them how wrong they are and how right we are, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they want with all their hearts to know the source of it. And I think too often we're out there trying to show other people how wrong they are and how right I am, and in the process, we're not drawing them to Christ. And I guess this is a very big point with me, that I feel like we need to use a different approach. Madeline L'Engle, it's in the book Walking on Water. I consider it so important, I've written it on a little slip of paper, and it's right outside my office door. So my wish is, I wish the church could do more in providing something meaningful for the well-educated and secular society. Christianity and Adventism can provide an appealing picture of Jesus Christ that will draw in this people group, but we have not done well at reaching out to them. We can't let building the walls of our fortress higher get in the way of being the salt of the earth, a blessing to this important group. And I have lots of stories I can tell about that. I am sorry that I am running late on time here. Fascinating book I read a month ago about the faith of Christopher Hitchens, one of the four horsemen of the New Atheists, who he actually had many conversations with the Christian pastor before he died. And this is a book written by that pastor, Larry Taunton. I just got the book a month and a half ago, telling about Hitchens didn't become a Christian, but he was interested in Christianity and had many conversations about Christianity. A very positive relationship was developed. And Christopher Hitchens said about this Christian, he said, if everyone in the United States had the same qualities of loyalty and care and concern for others that Larry Taunton had, we'd be living in a much better society than we do. And that was his opinion about this Christian. Okay, sharing. I have a whole talk about sharing, and I'm afraid I don't have time for that. I wrote a 20-page document about sharing back in December. And I'll at least go through this. My lifelong goal has been to study and share Jesus, Christianity, and the Seventh-day Adventist message, especially with those of a scientific mindset. Hard rock apologetics, however, is especially difficult. We are doing our honest best, but much research is needed. Then my third point was apologetics is often poor and ineffective. I prefer the term sharing more than argument. And finally, we are developing productive ways of sharing the big picture of a good and powerful Creator God as exemplified in Jesus Christ. So this was kind of my summary of this 20-page document. So, in conclusion, to offer a Christ-like God. And I was going to show you a video clip, but I think I am pretty much out of time. So, that's kind of the summary of what I wanted to say. I am happy to give you some stories, some personal experiences of working with people, or I'm happy to do some question and answer, whatever you'd like.
Question and answer probably would be in order. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Clausen. Again, when you ask your question, try to be as concise as possible so that we can get more in. And so I'm going to try to get, did Jack leave? Oh, can you help me today, Jack? Dr. Bennett here, my colleague from Rotary. So I'm going to try to start on this side and we'll work across. So if you can raise your hand, Jack, if you could. And I want to leave time at the end for Dr. Johnsson. At the end. Or do you want a response now? No. All right, your questions. Yes.
Ben, thank you for your presentation. It was very helpful. I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about tell us a little bit about how you think we can reach out to the non-Adventist educated class and engage in a meaningful relationship.
Okay, well maybe that leads me into telling some stories. So I can kill two birds with one stone. I have many stories of reaching out, and I will just give you one that probably has been the most meaningful to me. About 5 years ago, I was at a granite conference, 100 people studying granites from around the world. The conference was in Spain. I gave a poster presentation there comparing the geochemistry of the granitic rocks here in Southern California with the ones in Peru. And a geologist came up to me and said, "I'd like to work with you." And I knew this person. He didn't really know me from before then, but I knew him. He was a very well-known geologist, had several hundred geology publications. And so I was flattered. And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to work with you." The next day he came by and said, we need to talk about this a little bit. And so later in the day we got together and he said, "I'd like to know who I'm working with. And last night I Googled your name. And it came up, creationist, creationist, creationist." And he said, "I'm a little worried about that." And I said, "Well, I am a creationist. I believe that God is the creator. I'm not sure we have it all figured out exactly how God did it, but I'm willing to do good science research." And then I gave him my CV that has several dozen nuclear physics publications on it. And apparently it convinced him that I was safe to work with. The next year, he organized a GSA field conference in Yosemite that I attended, that I went on. And we continued working together. In about, well, I think it was about 3 years ago, I invited him to come down to Peru with us. And both he and his wife came. His wife also is a geologist. He's at USC, she's at Cal State Fullerton. Before we went, I told him we have prayer before meals, we have worship every morning, we rest on Sabbath. He said, "That's fine, no problem." So we had a couple weeks together where we worked together, and it was no issue at all. Then, about a year ago, he said, "We're going to have a GSA field trip for the granites here in Southern California. And I'd like to have you lead one day because you know the granites here. You've been working on it for 15 years. And I said, "Sure, that's fine." So I was in charge of one day of the field trip, the Friday, and he already knew that I wouldn't be there on Sabbath. It was a Friday, Sabbath, Sunday field trip. So on Sabbath, I went to church, and then I met the group out in Joshua Tree, and in the evening, Saturday evening, and some of the attendees said, they apparently knew where I had gone. I'd gone to church that day. And one of them, who's an editor for one of the geology journals, said, "Well, I appreciate what Seventh-day Adventists do." And so it was a good opportunity of working with them. Then he also was one person who spent a couple weeks with us down in Chile and Peru last March. And again, we rested on Sabbath and so forth. And as we were driving around in Chile, he and I and one of my students were driving around in one truck, and then there were some other people driving around in the other truck. And he asked question after question after question related to Christianity. Then, last month, I tell him about what's happening in our church. And so last month I said, "I am going on this field conference with General Conference administrators. Do you have any suggestions of what I can tell? What suggestions do you have?" And so he had some specific ideas of things that I should tell them. And if I can get my computer to work. No, I'll just tell you off the top of my head. One thing he said was, "You have a unique opportunity for working within the scientific community, and your church needs to realize that." Another thing he said was, he came up with this idea of the two books approach. At Christmas, he was over in Europe, and somebody was talking about you can learn about God both through nature as well as through science. He's in the Sierras right now. He went to the Sierras last Sunday. When he went, actually, I told him I was giving this lecture to you today, and I sent him a copy of Dr. Johnson's chapter. And he read it and found it quite interesting. He said, I got to go to the Sierras tomorrow morning, but I'd like to comment about it some more. And so then I told him, well, actually a month ago, I told him about working with the General Conference administrators. Another thing he said to tell them was encouraging the two books approach, that we can learn about God from both science as well as from the Bible. He also suggested if the church doesn't recognize the powerful place that science has in society, they're going to get left behind. So that's 3 of his points. There was another one I don't remember. It would take me a minute to get it off my computer. But basically, I think the personal interaction with people and them knowing that the church is a welcoming place for them. And I'm not sure whether right now he would find a welcoming environment within the Adventist church. But I think he might. And one of the email that I got from Elder Wilson yesterday or the day before suggested that there is a place for reaching out, and I really appreciated that. So I think if people saw that welcoming environment within the church, that might be one of the biggest things.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the flood, local versus global, geologic evidence for or against.
There is a list of evidence that flood geologists give that they suggest fits things in a short time frame. And this was part of my reason for geology guidelines. There is definitely a place for looking at all the little different features. What we really need is a comprehensive model that looks at all of the data. How does one explain the entire set of data in any particular Earth history model, whether it's a long age model or a short age model? This is the kind of thing that we're trying to look at in Peru. Are there ways of explaining the sedimentary deposits that cover basically all of the periods of the geologic column, the radiometric ages, the sedimentation, the erosion, transport, the cycles of magmatic activity, the plate tectonic activity that seems to have been occurring the entire geologic column, and that's the kind of thing that needs to be worked on. At this point, I don't know how to do it, but that's what needs to be looked at.
One of the hardest areas I find are the too close. Okay, are the pre-human, the hominids, and they're finding more Homo naledi in South Africa, and then the Neanderthal. How genetically we have some of their genes. Can you help me understand how that fits into the creation story?
Probably not. That is definitely not my specialty. I can tell you something off the top of my head, but I don't feel like I know any more about it than you do. I can talk to you about hard rock geology, plate tectonics, radiometric dating, but I'm no specialist on biology. I apologize for that.
Dr. Clausen, thank you very much. A couple of your quotes that stuck with me. You've said you've learned to live with the paradoxes. Appreciate that. And you said that I'm finding it difficult to reconcile the data, which I interpreted to be it's difficult to answer the paradox. Right. Could you help me with this bit? If you can't answer the paradox, why do you think the church that you consult with and lead, why do you think the church makes this topic a non-negotiable moral test of faithfulness if you can't reconcile the data?
I think there's a couple reasons the church thinks it's so important. One is the Sabbath plays a central role within Adventism. And the Sabbath is a memorial of the six-day creation. So I think that's one reason that the six-day creation is emphasized. The other reason, I believe, has to do with the problem of evil. And how does one picture the character of God? Does one accept that God uses long ages of suffering and competition and survival of the fittest and death as his method of development? So I think it's probably those two reasons that the church considers so important.
And how I hear you saying that you're able to talk about two things that are contradictory. What I would love to hear, if you're able to, is to say, the question is, what language do you use to say that you are maybe not, I don't even have the language, that you are a creationist. So do you then say, I believe in a six-day creation? I also believe, what language do you use to keep these two, or many balls in the air? What is the language that you find acceptable to both the church and to scientists?
That is an excellent question, and one I struggle with every day. When I'm talking to church groups, I use church language. When I talk with my scientific colleagues, I use the standard scientific language. I don't start off talking to my science colleagues by saying, oh, well, I'm a creationist. And I think I have a good precedent for that. In the Desire of Ages, well, in the Bible, Jesus tells his disciples not to tell people that he's the Messiah. And then the Desire of Ages specifically explains why. When they were at Caesarea Philippi and Peter acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah, Jesus said, don't tell people. And Mrs. White enlightens us why. She says, if the disciples had told the people that this was the Messiah, it would have given them no true understanding of what he was. Because he came as the Messiah to do something totally different than what they expected. And I feel like if I tell people that I'm a creationist, if I tell people in the scientific community that, they will immediately have a picture of an ignorant, obnoxious person who doesn't know what they're talking about and they're just out to attack science. And that is totally different picture than what I want to present. And so I don't start off with that. And I've also noted places in the Desire of Ages where Jesus emphasizes the need to keep silent. So for example, when he healed the lepers, he told them, or at least some of them, he said, don't broadcast it. And then she gives 3 or 4 or 5 reasons why they should not tell that they had been healed. So, we're supposed to be out and telling this creation message to the world. I'm a little reticent about doing it in quite the way that it has usually been done, because there's such an incorrect understanding of what creationists are. And I feel like I'm anxious to spread the message of God as creator, but I don't want to carry along with it so much of the baggage that will just turn most scientists, most in the secular community off. So that's a kind of a short answer. I could say a lot more, but maybe I'll quit with that.
Isaiah chapter 51 pictures creation as the dividing of Rahab, the splitting of Rahab. This appears to be in conflict with the first chapter of Genesis, which pictures it as a 6-day creation, 7-day rest. Isaiah also places the Exodus in parallel with creation. And you see that in the commandments that are given in Deuteronomy. The 4th commandment is in honor of the Exodus, and it doesn't even mention creation. So my reaction to this is, why do we place such strong emphasis upon a 6-day creation, literal 24-hour days, whenever there are other options for interpretation that are presented in Scripture?
I think Genesis 1 is correct. I think Genesis 2 is correct. I think these other creation stories in the Bible are correct. I think these are representations of what God did within different contexts and to different audiences, and I think that they're all correct. But I think we have such a small picture of God and what He can do that we have no idea of what He did there. Just a little bit of an idea. And I would suggest that it's much bigger than we can imagine. And so I could give some more comments about your God is too small. And I wouldn't say that the Bible is incorrect. I would just say that we have too small a picture of interpreting it to understand how God has reduced Himself as He talks there in Scripture. So I haven't answered your question, but I think what actually happened is so much bigger than what we can imagine that our human minds can't comprehend it. And so God's just had to use ways of communicating with us that, limit in different ways.
Thank you for your presentation. Very, very good. Could you comment? You're in a unique position to comment on a question. In your view, is the official church trying to defend the Bible or Ellen White?
Probably both. As far as my understanding of Ellen White, I guess maybe what I should say there is I have found the Desire of Ages to be extremely helpful in trying to understand how to deal with science and religion issues. I have read the entire book at least half a dozen times, and then parts of it dozens and dozens of times. Especially the chapter Days of Conflict. Another one on Among Snares. I just read both of those this past week. I read part of it this morning, getting some ideas. And I think that she gives an approach that's very valuable. As far as what the church is trying to do, I think the church is interested in both the Sabbath as well as the theodicy issue of how do you understand a good God when we see the evil around us. So I think those are the things that the church is trying to emphasize. Sometimes I think it may get lost.
Your example of witnessing. Your good science seems to be the best witness, and you're living your faith.
I think so. Yeah, exactly.
Mrs. White does make the comment that God has withheld things from us because our minds are too small. We couldn't possibly understand them. But He's given us enough evidence that we can leave things to Him, it seems to me, in our faith. But what concerns me, I'm not scientist, healthcare one, but not in the science field. But in terms of witnessing to scientists, you've given some wonderful examples. But if they come into a church that does not have the understanding that you do, they're lost again, because our church does not officially leave that open when they include things in fundamental beliefs that the Bible does not support. That is a great concern in even discussing it with friends. Can you comment on that and how you talk to our leaders?
That is a concern that I have. And I have tried to figure out ways. I've given you one example of my colleague at USC, who I've talked to regularly, including, a couple emails just this past week. Another colleague that I sent 3 or 4 emails to yesterday as we were working on a GSA abstract. He got his degree at Caltech under the guy who developed the stable isotope oxygen-18 technique that we're working on. He has his own lab, and we're working in his lab, and so forth. Would I invite these people to come to church? I am not sure that I would. But what I do instead is find ways to talk to them. This one person at USC, I'll just give you an example of this. A month ago, as I was flying to Milan, Italy, I think it was a flight from JFK to Milan, I was looking through the movies that I could watch. And I found one entitled Silence. I don't know whether you've seen that one advertised. It is about Christianity in Japan in the 1600s. Apparently, there were hundreds of thousands of Christians in Japan in the 1600s, and they were persecuted out of existence. And there's a movie that came out earlier this year about that. It's biographical fiction, so it's not totally accurate, but it's pretty, the general concept is there. Let's see, the director was Martin Scorsese. The lead player was Andrew Garfield, who also played Desmond Doss in Hacksaw Ridge. So I watched this movie. Then I talked to some of the GC administrators about, there's a big evangelistic push in Japan, I guess, in the next couple months. But I also sent an email to my colleague at USC and told him about watching this movie. And for some reason, he got very interested in me. He said, I'd like to know more about Adventism in Japan. I don't know why. And I said, well, I don't know much about it. Here's this book. And then he went and did a Google search, Adventism in Japan, and what should he come up with but a report written by David Trim at the General Conference and commissioned by Mike Ryan, and he read through it, and he sent me this article. And so I think it's just a one-on-one relationship, and I've had more opportunities with him than others, but I can tell you lots of stories with lots of other people as well who are interested. And it's more the one-on-one than it is, big evangelistic meetings for those kind of people.
Okay, we are out of time.
Okay, sorry.
I need to have our benediction. You will remain by if somebody wants to speak to you. And remember, next week, Gerald Whitehouse will be with us, speaking on missions. And we look forward to that. At this time, let's do our benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. Thank you very much.